They called it grief. She called it love. When 19-year-old Celia Monroe lost her mother and two sisters in a horrific highway accident, she didn't just lose her family. She lost the pillars of her identity. The world she knew evaporated in an instant, leaving behind only one familiar figure. Her father, Marcus Monroe, a quiet, broken man who wore his pain like a second skin. At first, it was innocent. He'd hold her at night when the nightmares wouldn't stop. They'd sit up until morning talking about the past, mourning what they had both lost. He stopped going to work. She stopped going to class. They became each other's everything. Two shattered souls orbiting in the same grief-stricken house, surviving only because of the other's presence. But then, lines blurred. He started controlling who she spoke to, what she wore, how long she stayed out. When she cried, he kissed her forehead and called her his queen. And when he said he would be getting remarried to rebuild the family, something inside her cracked. She didn't see a stepmother. She saw a stranger trying to steal her place beside him. Then one morning, that stranger was found dead, stabbed in the bathtub. No forced entry, no robbery, just blood and silence. At trial, the jury sat frozen as the prosecutor read from Celia's handwritten diary, a twisted account of a relationship so emotionally entangled it made the judge visibly shift in his seat. But it was her final entry that left the courtroom in stunned silence. "I didn't kill her because I hated her. I killed her because it was the only way to finally get away from him." Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming stories. Celia Monroe was 19 when the accident happened. A second-year college student majoring in psychology, she had come home that weekend to celebrate her younger sister's 14th birthday. The plan was to visit her grandmother out of town, a simple road trip, just her mom and her two sisters. Celia had stayed back to study for midterms. By Sunday morning, they were dead. A semi-truck lost control on a wet curve just outside Marietta, Georgia. The family's car was hit head-on. Emergency crews said they died on impact. 3 bodies, closed caskets. And just like that, the Monroe household went silent. Marcus Monroe, Celia's father, was never the same after the crash. A contractor with a quiet temperament and a disciplined life, he stopped taking jobs. He barely ate. He paced at night, stared at the walls during the day. In those early weeks, it was grief in its rawest form. Neighbours dropped off casseroles. Friends offered to stay the night. But after the funerals were over and the visitors stopped knocking, it was just Marcus and Celia left inside that house. They started sleeping in the living room. At first together, then on the same couch, then in the same bed. She told police later that it wasn't physical, not then. But something shifted, slowly, quietly, without either of them saying a word. Marcus became obsessed with routine, her routine. He started driving her to school, waiting outside her classes, asking questions about her texts, her calls, her friends. It wasn't harsh, it was subtle, protective, he'd say. But to those who saw them, like Celia's friend Jasmine, it looked off. Jasmine once asked, "Why does your dad call you his person?" Celia laughed it off. But inside, she wasn't sure she had the answer. And there was something else, something more unsettling. Celia stopped crying, not because she wasn't hurting, but because she felt needed. Every time she broke down, Marcus would hold her like she was all he had left in the world. She didn't know if it was grief or guilt or just the comfort of not being alone. But in the stillness of their house, they began to rely on each other in ways that no one could quite see or stop. Then one evening, about 3 months after the funeral, Marcus told her he couldn't keep living like this. He said he wanted to start over, said it was time to heal the family. He introduced her to someone new. Her name was Ava. She was beautiful, polite, a widow herself. And Celia, for the first time in months, felt something new: jealousy. Eva Whitman had soft eyes, a warm smile, and a calm voice that didn't raise even when people interrupted her. She worked as a nurse at a nearby clinic and had lost her husband to cancer 2 years before meeting Marcus. On paper, she was everything a grieving man deserved: gentle, mature, stable. But to Celia, she felt like a stranger walking barefoot across a sacred grave. The first time Eva came over for dinner, Celia had made lasagna, her mother's old recipe. Marcus had complimented her, said it tasted just like how your mum made it. Eva agreed, smiled sweetly. And just like that, Celia stopped eating. She started noticing things. Eva's hand resting on her father's forearm. Marcus laughing and at something that wasn't Celia's joke. They were small things, harmless things, but to Celia they felt like theft, like she was being replaced. Again. Celia told herself it was grief, normal even. But inside her, a new emotion had begun to stir, one she hadn't felt since the accident: possession. She'd lost her mother, she'd lost her sisters. And now this woman was sitting in the chair where her mother used to sit, reaching for the same hands that used to console her at night. It didn't feel right. It felt like betrayal. She started staying home more, watching them, listening. Once, late at night, she stood outside her father's room and heard Eva laugh softly. The sound made her stomach twist. She found herself clenching her fists in the dark, unable to move. The next morning, she didn't speak to either of them. By the 3rd week, Eva suggested therapy, said maybe it would help them all process the grief together. Celia snapped. "She doesn't belong in our grief," she told Marcus. "She didn't lose what we lost." That night, Marcus sat her down, told her firmly but calmly that things were changing, that Eva made him feel alive again, that he deserved happiness too. Celia stared at him, and then she said something that made Marcus go quiet. "I thought I was your person." There was a pause. Marcus looked at her, not with anger, but something close to confusion. He didn't answer, just stood up and walked to the kitchen. From the hallway, Celia watched him pour himself a glass of water, his back turned. He stood there for a long time. And that's when she knew. He had already chosen. Not her. Not their bond. Not their grief. But Eva. A few days later, Marcus announced they were getting engaged. Celia didn't react. She congratulated them, gave Eva a long, cold hug, and smiled for the camera. But inside something had broken, and nobody knew it yet. Not even her. Celia didn't cry when her father told her about the engagement. She didn't beg. She didn't scream. Instead, she nodded and asked if she could help with the wedding planning. Marcus was stunned by her maturity. Eva, relieved. They assumed it was a sign of healing, of acceptance. But what they didn't realize, and what nobody saw, was that Celia wasn't healing. She was disappearing behind her eyes. She began volunteering information, even suggesting the venue, a quiet botanical garden on the outskirts of town. She offered to design the invitations and even helped Marcus pick out Eva's ring. But while she was smiling through dinner and complimenting Eva's dress choices, she was keeping a diary. The pages of that diary would one day be read aloud in a courtroom. Celia documented everything, not just dates and times, but emotions, moments she felt replaced, dreams she had of her mother standing in corners, weeping. Even the first time she kissed her father months after the accident, how it had felt less like sin and more like survival. A way to keep what little she had left. She didn't describe it graphically. She never framed her father as a predator. In fact, she wrote that he was her only tether to the world, and that if he ever left, she would untether completely. In the weeks leading to the wedding, Marcus and Eva grew closer. Celia noticed they had private jokes now, the kind he used to share only with her. One evening, she saw Marcus rubbing Eva's shoulders in the kitchen, his hands moving across her back with ease. That night, Celia wrote just one sentence in her diary. He touches her the way he used to bandage me. A few days later, Marcus left town for a business trip. Eva stayed in the house. Celia offered to cook dinner, just the two of them. They ate on the patio, candlelight, soft music. Eva talked about her late husband, how she used to think grief would swallow her whole. She even told Celia she saw her as the daughter she never had. Celia smiled, thanked her. An hour later, Eva began to feel dizzy. She excused herself, thinking it was just the wine. She never made it back to the table. Authorities later found traces of a powerful sedative in Eva's bloodstream. It wasn't enough to kill her, just enough to render her confused, disoriented. The toxicology report said her reaction could have been delayed, possibly masked by the alcohol. At 3:17 a.m., a neighbour's outdoor camera caught a shadowy figure dragging a body-sized object across the driveway. At 5:12 a.m., Celia walked into the precinct and reported Eva missing. She cried, told officers she'd heard nothing, seen nothing, that Eva must have gone out and never returned. The search lasted 3 days. It ended when they found Eva's body wrapped in plastic at the edge of a local pond, the same one where Celia's family had picnicked every year before the accident. She'd been strangled. The rope matched one from the Whitman garage, no fingerprints, just Eva's engagement ring lodged between her fingers as if she'd been clutching it at the end. Marcus collapsed when he heard the news. Celia held him, softly stroking his back. She whispered, "I'm here. I'll never leave you." And he believed her, at least for a while. But nothing stays buried forever, especially not when grief turns into obsession, and obsession turns into murder. After Eva's body was found, grief returned to the Monroe house. But it wasn't the same grief that came after the accident. This one was quieter, sharper, more suspicious. Marcus barely spoke. He answered questions from the detectives, he made arrangements. But mostly he sat at the kitchen table, staring at Eva's untouched coffee mug from the morning she died. He didn't eat, he didn't shave, he didn't go back to work, and Celia stayed close. Too close. She cooked his meals, folded his laundry, held his hand when he broke down, and every time the doorbell rang, police, reporters, neighbours, she was the one who answered it. To the outside world, she was the grieving daughter of a man who had lost everything twice. But inside the house, things were shifting. Marcus stopped sleeping in his room. He began sleeping on the couch again, alone. He told Celia he couldn't bear the silence of Eva's perfume still lingering on the sheets. One night, around 2 a.m., Celia knocked on the bathroom door. Marcus had been inside for over an hour. She found him sitting on the floor, staring at himself in the mirror. "I'm cursed," he whispered. Celia knelt beside him, held his face, told him they could start over, just the two of them, that maybe the world had taken too much, and it was time to stop giving it chances. He didn't respond, just closed his eyes. A week later, Marcus started pulling away, not drastically, but enough to notice. He turned down her offers to cook, started taking long walks alone. He didn't say it, but she felt it. Distance, a kind of retreat. And then, one afternoon, Celia saw it. A single manila envelope left half-tucked under Marcus's jacket on the couch. Inside, Eva's funeral program and a printed email from a grief counsellor. Scheduled session, individual, not family. It felt like betrayal all over again. That night, Celia began tearing pages out of her diary. Not all of them, just the ones that made her look too attached, too exposed. She burned some in the kitchen sink, flushed others down the toilet. But she left most of it intact, not to preserve her innocence, but to preserve her story. Because a part of her knew it would all come out eventually. And when it did, she wanted people to understand. Not excuse, not forgive. Just understand what it feels like to lose everything and still be expected to let go. That same week, detectives brought her in for clarification. A second interview. Nothing formal, just some loose ends. They asked about the last dinner with Eva. Celia said she made chicken piccata. They asked about the music playing that night. She said she couldn't remember, but the detective noticed her hands, scratched, faint bruises along the wrists. She said she'd tripped in the backyard. When they let her go, Celia didn't cry. She walked out of the station head high, and that's when Marcus finally began to question it all. The inconsistencies, the way Celia never seemed shocked, the missing rope from the garage. He confronted her, asked quietly if she had anything to do with Eva's death. She didn't deny it. She didn't confirm it either. She just said, "You always said you'd do anything to protect me. Did you mean that?" Marcus didn't respond. He just sat down. And for the first time in months, he didn't look at her as his daughter. He looked at her like someone he didn't recognize. It was the beginning of the end. Because from that moment on, Marcus stopped protecting her. And the walls around Celia's story, the carefully constructed image of grief, healing and redemption, began to crack. Crack just enough for the truth to slip through. The detectives had suspicions, but no hard evidence. Until one quiet Wednesday morning, a housekeeper found a leather-bound notebook tucked beneath a loose floorboard in Celia's room. It wasn't hidden well, as if, deep down, Celia wanted it to be found. It was her diary, 217 pages. The first entry dated just 2 days after the car crash that killed her mother and 2 sisters. The last entry, dated the morning Eva died. Detectives read it, then reread it. There were no confessions, no direct statements of guilt. But every word bled with the psychology of a young woman spiraling into a dark, emotional dependency. She chronicled how her father became her entire world, how their grief became intimacy, how his attempt to move on, to love someone else, felt like betrayal. The passages grew darker as the wedding approached. One entry stood out. "When I killed Eva in my mind, it felt like I was burying my mother all over again. But this time I got to choose who died." The district attorney charged Celia with first-degree murder. The courtroom was packed. Marcus Whitman took the stand. He looked hollow, broken. A shell of the father who once built his life around Sunday pancakes and bedtime stories. When asked if he was aware of any inappropriate relationship with his daughter, he looked at Celia and said nothing. Silence. The media exploded, speculations flew. The defense tried to frame the murder as an act of temporary insanity born from years of unresolved trauma. They submitted the diary as evidence, not of guilt, but of psychological unraveling. But then came the twist. A forensic psychologist took the stand and testified that Celia wasn't insane. She was methodical, controlled, calculated. She planned the wedding, the doctor said. She picked the venue, offered to help with the guest list. She didn't spiral. She strategized. Then the final blow. A video was found on Celia's phone. A shaky recording, time-stamped a week before the wedding. In it, Celia looks directly into the camera and says, "They say prison is hell, but it's freedom compared to living next to someone who abandoned you twice." She ends the video with a whisper, once for Mum, now for her. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. Verdict, guilty. Sentence, 35 years without parole. Celia didn't flinch. She looked at her father and smiled, not warmly, but with relief, as if she had finally completed something. On the day of her sentencing, reporters asked if she had any final words. She said, "He took everything from me, then tried to move on. Prison won't break me, it saved me." Marcus was never charged with anything, but he resigned from his job, moved out of town, and hasn't been seen publicly since. Some say he lives alone now, somewhere in the Midwest. Others say he visits Celia once a year, just to sit on the other side of the glass. But no one knows what they say to each other. And the diary? It's sealed. By court order. Too disturbing, they said. Too revealing. But there's one final line from the diary that still echoes. I didn't kill her because she loved him. I killed her because he might have loved her more than he loved me.